Hello there, many thanks for joining us on the business desk this morning. Now, the federal government hopes to push its public debt stock to 50.22 trillion naira by the year 2023, with domestic debt at 28.75 trillion naira and external debt at 21.47 trillion naira. Well, this is according to projections in the National Development Plan 2021 to 2025, and the Debt Management Office disclosed that Nigeria's public debt was about 38 trillion naira as of the end of the third quarter of the year 2021, with the total debt stock rising by 2.54 trillion naira in 3 months from July to September this year. Well, this shows that the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari plans to accumulate about 12 trillion naira debt in 2 years, that's from 2021 to 2023. However, based on the plan, the government targets a reduction in total public debt by the year 2025. Now, a tabular illustration in the document shows that government targets 39.59 trillion naira debt stock for this year, 46.63 trillion naira for 2022, 50.22 trillion naira for 2023, 50.53 trillion naira for 2024, and then 45.96 trillion naira for the year 2025. Well, joining me now to discuss this and much more, I have Olusegun Elemo joining me virtually to discuss this and more. He's a public finance and policy analyst. Good to have you on the breakfast show this morning, and happy holidays, Segun.
Yeah, thank you very much. Merry Christmas in arrears, and of course, Happy New Year in advance.
Exactly. Now, this matter of the state of borrowing is worrying for some, but according to some individuals, as a matter of fact, now debt service to revenue would remain at about 80% come next year. But there are obvious reasons for borrowing. The government needs to embrace more borrowing. But some also argue that it's not as simple as within the realm of revenue generation, it's not as simplistic as it looks like. And the other counter argument is that borrowings must have track records. We will see what we are borrowing for, see the implementation process, and have a repayment plan, not just borrow out of the blues. Your thoughts on both sentiments?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think generally the idea that government continues to borrow, and increasingly for that matter, is worrisome and unsettling. But like you said, there's so much more in the country today calling for attention. The development plan itself will not finance itself, and the development plan, government says he wants to finance 14% of the total plan, of which 9% is for the federal government, and then I think the remaining 6% is for subnational government, and I think about 86% resources will be mobilized from the private sector. The challenge about borrowing, and I think we had this discussion at the 2022 Economic Outlook, which the International Monetary Fund (IMF) organized recently in Lagos. There was a general consensus that yes, the debt to GDP is low, and Nigeria can continue to leverage on that to get more financing. But that the problem is not that we're borrowing exactly. Like you mentioned, is that we are not seeing exactly what we're borrowing for, and that expenditure is not efficient. I mean, public expenditure in this regard. And I will just quickly, give a rundown on how this is becoming worrisome and unsettling. Is that in 2019, for instance, the total budget of the Federation, was about a little bit above 8 trillion. I think about 8.92 trillion. Of that amount, we had the total deficit of that budget was around 21%. Now, in 2021, we had about 13.5 trillion of total budget of the Federation. Now, deficit increased from 21% in 2019 to more than 41% in 2021. And again, even though in 2022, the projection is that we will have about a little bit about 36% as budget deficit. So you could see that there is increasing trend in borrowing. But like I said, is that we are not seeing exactly, or let me say, not that we are not seeing exactly, what we're seeing on the ground today is not commensurate to how much we're spending and how much money is being borrowed. I take, for instance, the infrastructure in the oil and gas industry, for instance. How much can we say that the level of infrastructure we have today is commensurate to how much we intend to borrow? Look at the transportation sector, look at the housing sector, look at the healthcare sector, and all of that, even the education. So those are critical areas that I believe government needs to spend on. And again, is that for instance, in 2019, the total amount that was not accounted for stood about 706 billion naira and $957 million across 87 agencies of government. So that is it. The problem is expenditure efficiency.
And talking about expenditure efficiency, the role of corruption in all of this and much more, there's also this argument that all of the monies lost, government has lost so far, looking at illicit financial flows and loots also being recovered as well. Instead of having these voluminous borrowings, we ought to put together all of this money stocked some way, somehow, and then begin to make them work, account for them. Do you think we're seeing accountability within this regard and using all of these funds for the infrastructure and developmental agenda we are setting ahead?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I continue to say, and I think there's a general consensus, even in the civil society, ecosystem, that yes, there is increased transparency on the part of government. Government continues to publish data. And, for instance, the Open Treasury, portal, government continues to publish data, and there is increased transparency. But whether that transparency has led to accountability is another thing entirely. And my opinion is that, and this is my personal opinion, but of course it's data-driven, is that there is less accountability today with regards to the use of public funds. And there is empirical evidence to support that. I think that government is, there seems to be this, like a disco approach to revenue mobilization. And like you said, instead of government, going after what it has outstanding, for instance, with regards to illicit financial flows and funds and public funds that are not being duly accounted for. And for instance, possibly to cut budget allocation to agencies of government that are unable to account for public funds. It then goes borrowing. That's the easiest thing to do. And for whether at the micro or macro level, for instance, even at the individual level, it's easy to go borrowing as long as you have somebody to give you the money. But whether you are ready and willing to work hard to get more money for yourself that you earn is another thing entirely. And I think government needs to look at that approach, and not just the federal government, but even at subnational level. There are so many ways by which government can mobilize revenue and not necessarily raise taxes. And there are a lot of contention around that. For instance, the outlook in 2022, government, looks to raising taxes and cutting subsidies, but then putting that resources in such inefficient ways of, providing 5,000 naira for 40 million people. I think those are areas that we need to look at our spending and cut down all these inefficiencies. Perhaps we'll borrow less, and then if we're able to tie all the knots of accountability, then we'll be able to get value for the money that we're spending. I think that is the most important thing now.
Olusegun, we are wrapping up our conversation now. Do you see a shift in the stance of government in terms of the notion it says that we don't have a debt crisis, rather what we have is a revenue generation challenge? Now, with the forecast that debt service to revenue generation is going to be about 80% come next year, isn't it clear enough to see that if you cannot raise enough revenue, then you will likely be indebted once you begin to start borrowing heavily? Why is it difficult for government to understand that the revenue challenge equals debt? Hence, that's why the whole business community is raising a whole lot of alarm. But government seems not worried about this sentiment.
Absolutely, absolutely. You see, whether we like it or not, at some point we have to shift that stance of we don't have a debt crisis. At some point you will get to a point where you have debt crisis, because if you continue to borrow and you cannot finance that borrowing, or you don't have sufficient assets to be able to support your borrowing, at some point the lenders will back off, and that will tell you that you indeed have debt crisis. I think it will be irresponsible on the part of this government to continue to borrow and accumulate more debt for successive governments. So I think there's a general approach in this administration, and like I said, not just the national level, even at subnational, different states. And the Fiscal Responsibility Commission will tell you that many of the states are borrowing not for capital expenditure but for recurrent expenditure. Now, I think the general idea with this government is that they want to quickly borrow as much as they could, perhaps because of the proximity to elections. And then again, many of the federal ministers are possibly thinking that, of course, they might not appear in the next administration. So everybody want to quickly implement as many projects, no matter how elephant the project looks. Just get the money in, implement it. Whether we get value for it or not doesn't matter, as long as money comes in the pocket of individuals. But I don't think that should be the general approach. There's so much infrastructure deficit right now at the national, state, and local levels, and we need to close all of these gaps.
We definitely need to close all of these gaps to be able to make sure that we have our economic agenda also well attended to. Thank you very much for your time on the Breakfast Show this morning, Olusegun Elemo. It's really a tall order we have for the year 2022, and we can only keep our fingers crossed as to how well government will perform. Thank you very much for your time on the Breakfast Show.
Thank you for having me.